Hey there, fellow knowledge seeker. You ready for a wild ride through human history? Buckle up, because this deep dive is going to take us from, battling mammoths to actually trying to outsmart death itself. We're using Yuval Noah Harari's Homo Deus, A Brief History of Tomorrow, to guide us. And let me tell you, this book is a total mind-blower. We got a lot to unpack, so let's just jump right in. We're talking, famine, sugar rushes, quest for immortality, maybe even a sprinkle of engineered happiness. And of course, expert speakers here to help us connect all these dots across, well, millennia. So, expert speaker, you ready to tackle this beast of a book?
Oh, absolutely. Harari, he just has this way of making you question, everything you thought you knew about being human. It's a wild ride, for sure.
Okay, so Harari, he starts things off with this really stark picture of the past. We're talking famine so bad
Yeah.
that people were desperate enough to eat, well, let's just say their options were very limited. I mean, he even quotes this French official who described people resorting to, cats, horse meat, even animal blood, just to survive. And then, of course, there was plague, a constant threat, and war, basically an everyday occurrence. It's crazy to think how different life was just a few centuries ago, right? But then Harari, he throws us a curveball. He says that today, in the 21st century, get this, more people actually die from diabetes than from violence. Sugar, it turns out, is a bigger threat than gunpowder. It's kind of wild when you think about it. We've made all this progress, but then our own ingenuity creates whole new challenges, things we never even saw coming. What do you make of that, expert speaker?
It's fascinating, isn't it? And what's really interesting is Harari isn't saying we should just ignore suffering. It's more that the entire nature of the threats we face has, fundamentally changed. We've gone from being at the mercy of nature to basically becoming the dominant force on the planet, shaping it for better or worse.
He calls it the Anthropocene epoch, right?
Yeah.
The age of humans.
Exactly. And he uses this really interesting comparison between mammoths and rabbits to show what he means.
Oh, right. Tell us about that.
Okay, so mammoths, they bred pretty slowly, right? So even a little bit of hunting by humans could wipe out a whole herd over generations. But rabbits, they multiply rabbits. So they could withstand a lot more hunting pressure. Harari uses that example to show how even our smallest actions as humans can have a huge impact, especially on species that don't reproduce as quickly.
It's kind of terrifying when you really think about it.
Yeah.
We've driven, I don't even know how many species to extinction a lot of times without even realizing it.
Hmm.
So where do we go from here? Can we actually separate, decouple this progress we've made for the damage we're doing to the planet?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the answer, well, it's not a simple one. Harari argues that we have to find a way to decouple the two, progress and sustainability, because it's that same drive for economic growth, which brought us so many solutions, that also fuels a lot of the instability we're seeing. It's a tough dilemma, no doubt.
It really is. And then, just when you think things can't get any wilder, Harari throws another curveball.
Yeah.
He says we're on the verge of something huge, like a full-on scientific assault on death itself. He even mentions Google's company, Calico. Their mission is literally, quote, to solve death.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but that makes me want to either, run for the hills or sign up for their waiting list immediately. It's exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. What are your thoughts on this, expert speaker?
It's interesting how this whole quest for immortality, it's not new. It echoes throughout history. The ancient Egyptians built pyramids as their path to eternal life. Religions promise an afterlife. But now we're talking about scientific solutions, not just spiritual ones. It's like a fundamental shift in how we view death, from an inevitable end to a problem we might actually be able to solve.
It really makes you think, though, if we could conquer death, what would that mean for humanity as a whole? Would art still matter? Would religion? Would we even have that same drive and ambition if we knew we had all the time in the world?
That's the big question, isn't it? Can technology really provide what humans crave the most, to truly not die? Or are we chasing after some fantasy that's ultimately going to leave us feeling emptier than before?
And even if we could somehow engineer immortality, would all those extra years actually be fulfilling? Harari points out that back in the day, just having a simple hunk of bread, that can make a starving peasant totally happy. But now, not so much. He even mentions these studies that show that Americans in the 1990s, even with all their fancy gadgets and comforts, they were no happier than those living in the 1950s. It's kind of like, the more we have, the less satisfied we become. So how do we crack this code of happiness, especially in a world where we've already met our basic needs? What does Harari have to say about that, expert speaker?
Well, this is where his argument gets really interesting. He suggests that maybe Just maybe. We need to stop focusing on all these external factors, all the possessions and stuff, and look inward instead, like to our biochemistry.
Biochemistry, you mean like messing with our brain chemistry? Or we talk about popping happy pills as the future of joy?
Well, it's not quite that simple. But you're on the right track. I mean, think about it. We already use medications to treat depression, anxiety, right? So in a way, we're already tweaking our brain chemistry to try and feel better. Harari just suggests that in the future, we might develop even more sophisticated ways of manipulating our biochemistry, maybe even engineering happiness itself. Of course, that brings up a whole bunch of ethical questions, like who gets to decide what happiness even means in that scenario? And what are the long-term consequences of constantly messing with our natural state?
It's a little unsettling to think about, to be honest. And Harari doesn't stop there. He goes on to question some of our most basic assumptions about ourselves, like consciousness, free will, even our sense of self. He suggests that these might all just be illusions, tricks that our brains play on us. He talks about split brain patients, where the two halves of their brain basically function independently, even creating totally different stories to explain their own actions. It really makes you question what it means to be you, doesn't it?
It really does. Harari's argument, it's definitely unsettling, but it's also incredibly thought-provoking. If our sense of self, our free will, is really just a product of our biology, then what does that mean for how we understand things like individual liberty? Are we truly in control of our choices, or are we just puppets of our own neurochemistry?
It's enough to make your head spin. But before we spiral into a full-blown existential crisis here, maybe we should take a closer look at how we even got to this point. Like Harari talks about this major turning point in human history, the rise of agriculture. And he argues that it wasn't just about food production. It was about this fundamental shift in how we relate to the natural world. And it's here that he introduces this whole concept of the agricultural deal. So, expert speaker, tell us more about that. What is this agricultural deal and why does it matter so much?
Okay, so the agricultural deal, as Harari describes it, was essentially a contract, you could say, between humans and the animals we domesticated. He argues that while these animals, think cows, pigs, chickens, they benefited in some ways from human protection, but they also paid a hefty price, in terms of their freedom, their well-being, their entire way of life.
He doesn't paint a pretty picture of factory farms, that's for sure.
Yeah.
It's like these animals are treated more like commodities rather than living beings. It makes you really think about the ethical questions surrounding how we interact with the animals we depend on for food. Do we need to rethink our whole food system? Is it time to renegotiate this agricultural deal?
That's definitely a question Harari wants us to grapple with, and he argues that the rise of agriculture, it didn't just change our relationship with animals, it led to some really big changes in human societies as well.
How so?
Well, think about it. The need to manage crops and livestock, it led to new social structures, hierarchies, specialization of labor, and eventually the rise of civilizations. You need cooperation and organization on a whole different level to plant, harvest, and then distribute food when you're talking about feeding large populations. You can't do that with small, nomadic, hunter-gatherer groups. You need a different kind of social structure entirely.
So you're saying that the very act of settling down, of becoming farmers, set in motion this whole chain of events that would shape the entire course of human history.
Exactly. And it's not just about social structures either. Harari even links the emergence of theist religions, religions that believe in a single all-powerful God, to this whole agricultural revolution.
Wow, that's a really interesting connection. How does he make that link?
Well, he argues that these religions, which popped up around the same time as agriculture, they provided this whole new way of understanding the world. And crucially, they offered a way to justify human domination over nature. These religions created this whole narrative where humans were seen as separate from and superior to the natural world. It's like we put ourselves at the top of the food chain and basically gave ourselves permission to exploit the planet however we saw fit.
And that's had some pretty significant consequences, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. This whole anthropocentric view, this human-centered perspective, has had a huge impact on how we've treated the environment, how we've treated other species, basically how we've approached our whole relationship with the planet. And of course, it's something we're still grappling with today.
It makes you wonder, if we had made different choices back then, if we had adopted a different narrative, would we be facing the same environmental challenges today?
It's definitely something to ponder. But even with all that said, even with the downsides of the agricultural revolution, Harari also points out something remarkable about humans. He says that our ability to cooperate in large numbers, to coordinate the actions of millions, even billions of people, That's what truly sets us apart.
And chimpanzees, elephants, they can cooperate in small groups, but humans can operate on a whole other scale. So what's our secret? What's our secret sauce?
Harari believes it all comes down to our unique ability to create and believe in shared myths.
Shared myths. What do you mean by that?
Well, think about something like money. A dollar bill, it's just a piece of paper, right? It has no intrinsic value. It only has power because we all collectively agree to believe in its worth. We've imbued it with meaning, turning it into a tool for cooperation and exchange.
Wow, that's a fascinating way to look at it.
hmm
So you're saying that money is essentially a shared fiction, a story we all tell ourselves that allows us to achieve things on a scale that would be impossible if we were all acting individually.
Exactly. And this idea, it doesn't just apply to money. It extends to other large-scale human endeavors like nations, corporations, religions. These are all imagined realities that exist in our collective imagination. They might not exist in the same way that a mountain or a tree does, but they have a very real impact on our lives. They shape our identities, our values, our actions, everything.
This whole notion of shared myths is mind-blowing. It's like we've created this invisible world of meaning, and then we live our lives according to its rules, often without even realizing it.
That's exactly it. And Harari, he doesn't just leave it there. He delves even deeper into this whole concept of imagined realities by taking us on this journey through different eras of human history, starting with ancient Egypt.
Okay, so tell us about that. What does Harari have to say about the ancient Egyptians and their imagined realities?
Well, he talks about how in ancient Egypt, pharaohs weren't just seen as rulers. They were considered living gods. And the entire social order was built on this belief. People weren't just obeying their king, they were submitting to a divine being. It was this powerful shared belief that helped hold their society together.
It's incredible how these early civilizations used these myths, these rituals, these imagined realities to legitimize their power and create a sense of social cohesion. It was like they were weaving this shared reality that everyone could buy into.
Exactly. And this power of shared beliefs, it wasn't limited to ancient times. Harari then takes us to ancient Sumer, where he makes this really surprising connection between ancient temples and modern corporations.
Ancient temples and corporations. Now, that's an unexpected link.
Yeah.
How does he connect those two?
Well, he describes how Sumerian temples, they were essentially the first corporations. They had gods as their CEOs, priests as their managers. They had vast land holdings, assets. They even had sophisticated accounting systems, legal codes, management structures.
So these temples weren't just places of worship. They were like powerful economic entities. It's fascinating to see the seeds of our modern corporate structures present in these ancient institutions.
Exactly. And just like modern corporations, these early temples, they relied on shared fictions, legal contracts, these imagined realities to function. I mean, the idea of a god owning property or entering into a contract, that's a fiction. It's a story we tell ourselves to make sense of these complex social and economic systems.
It's almost like we've been hardwired for storytelling from the very beginning. We create narratives to explain the world around us, to organize our societies, to make sense of our place in the grand scheme of things.
Precisely. And as Harari shows, these narratives, these shared myths, they've played a pivotal role in shaping the entire course of human history, from the rise and fall of empires to the development of our most cherished beliefs and values.
This is already so much to take in, and we've barely scratched the surface of Homo Deus. We need to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll be diving into the evolution of human societies through different eras, starting with the invention of a truly revolutionary technology: writing. Stay tuned.
Ready to dive into the power of the written word.
Absolutely. It's amazing to think how this, seemingly simple thing, writing, completely transformed human civilization. I mean, before writing, knowledge was mostly passed down orally, right, from generation to generation. But writing, it's like, boom, suddenly we can store information outside our own heads. Talk about a game changer.
Totally. Harari really emphasizes how writing revolutionized everything. It's like this whole new way to store and transmit information across time, across space. The implications were huge.
No more limits on what we could remember or how far someone could travel to share an idea. It's like the internet of ancient civilizations. So how did this impact the development of societies, according to Harari?
Well, he argues that writing made large-scale empires possible. Think about it. Rulers could manage these vast territories, huge populations more effectively. You've got written records, laws, decrees. It changes the game.
Yeah, it's like the difference between running a small business versus like a multinational corporation.
Yeah.
You need totally different systems to handle that level of complexity.
Exactly. And those tools came in the form of written language. But there's another side to this that Harari highlights, and it's really fascinating. He says that these written texts, especially religious scriptures, became incredibly powerful for shaping beliefs, values on a massive scale.
So it wasn't just about like managing grain supplies or issuing royal decrees. It became about influencing how people thought, how they lived their lives.
Precisely. Think about the impact of religious texts like the Bible, the Quran, the Buddhist sutras. They've shaped the moral compasses and worldviews of billions of people for centuries.
It's mind-blowing. This seemingly simple act, like putting pen to paper or, well, stylus to clay tablet back then, could have such a huge ripple effect across history. It's shaping thought, belief, everything.
It really is. But Harari doesn't just focus on the good stuff. He talks about some of the challenges that come with written records, too.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
Well, he says that they can create this disconnect between what's written down and, like, actual reality. He gives the example of Chinese bureaucrats under Mao Zedong. They based their agricultural policies on data that wasn't accurate and, well,
That led to that horrible famine during the Great Leap Forward. Don't you bet?
exactly. A really tragic example of blindly trusting written records without checking them against the real world. The consequences can be devastating.
It's a cautionary tale for sure. We need to be critical thinkers. Question what we read, even when it seems official or authoritative.
Absolutely. Harari also talks about how written documents, things like maps, contracts, they can actually create imagined realities. These realities, even though they're based on words on a page, can shape how we see the world, how we act in very real, very concrete ways.
Can you give an example? How does a map create an imagined reality?
He uses the example of that Berlin conference in 1884. European powers basically drew lines on a map, carved up Africa into colonies, often ignoring the existing tribal boundaries, cultures, everything, all because of lines on a map.
It's crazy to think something as seemingly neutral as a map could be used to justify colonialism, to reshape the political landscape of a whole continent.
Right. It shows just how powerful these imagined realities can be, especially when they're backed by force, by those in power, and written into law.
It really makes you realize how much of what we consider real or natural is actually constructed, right? Like it's all built on these systems of language, of representation that we've created.
Exactly. And then Harari takes it a step further and explores how religious scriptures play into this, how they create and sustain these imagined realities. He argues that they often present like an idealized version of the world, maybe even a mythological one, and not necessarily one that reflects lived experience for many people.
It's like the difference between reading about a utopia in a book and then actually trying to build that utopia in a messy, complicated, real world, right?
Right. And he points out that many religious texts have factual errors, contradictions, even subjective interpretations, all of which can lead to conflict and misunderstanding.
Oh, absolutely. We see that playing out all the time. Even today, people interpreting the same text in completely different ways,
Yeah.
often to justify their own beliefs or actions.
Exactly. And one of the examples he gives is the donation of Constantine. This document, which was actually a forgery, was used in the Middle Ages to justify the Pope's claim to power in Europe.
Wait, so a fake document was used to justify political power for centuries?
Yep. It's a wild example of how history can be manipulated. It's rewritten, and how written texts, even fake ones, can have a huge impact.
It really makes you question everything you read. You start to see how these narratives, even ones presented as objective history, can be shaped by those in power, by hidden agendas.
Absolutely. And this critical lens is what Harari wants us to use, not just on history, but on everything. Question your assumptions. Look beyond the surface. Think about the forces at play that we might not see at first glance.
Because knowledge is never neutral, right?
Ah.
It's always presented within a specific context or worldview.
Exactly. And this leads us to another big shift in human thought that Harari digs into, the rise of humanism.
So we're shifting from, like, this dominance of religious thought to something more, well, human-centered. So tell us more about this move towards humanism. What does it mean?
So Harari explains how humanism kind of emerged during the Renaissance and Enlightenment periods. This time of huge intellectual and cultural change, people are questioning traditional religious ideas and really embracing the power of human reason, experience, individual freedom. It was a big deal.
Yeah. Like a breath of fresh air after centuries of being told what to believe by religious authorities, right?
Totally. It was a
Yeah.
pivotal moment, a turning point. We went from a God-centered view of the universe to a human-centered one, and this impacted everything. Art, science, politics, you name it.
I bet.
Yeah.
So what exactly did humanism emphasize? What were the core values?
At its heart, humanism is about celebrating human potential. It stresses things like human reason, ethics as the basis for morality, individual liberty, human rights, and the pursuit of knowledge through reason and evidence.
That sounds a lot like the foundation for a lot of the values we see in modern secular societies, doesn't it?
You could say that, but it's important to remember that humanism isn't just one thing. There are different flavors of humanism that have evolved over time.
Flavors. What do you mean?
Well, like you've got liberal humanism that really emphasizes individual rights and freedoms, and then you've got socialist humanism, which puts more emphasis on social justice, on collective well-being. There are secular humanists who focus on ethical living without a belief in God, and then you have religious humanists who try to find ways to reconcile their faith with humanist values.
So a lot of diversity under the big umbrella of humanism.
Absolutely, and that just shows how human thought keeps evolving. It's an ongoing conversation about what it means to be human, especially in this crazy, ever-changing world. And that's where Harari brings in this other fascinating point, the relationship between science and humanism.
Right, because science was also making huge leaps at that time, right?
Yeah.
So how did those two forces interact? Did they work together, or were there, like, clashes?
Harari makes a really interesting point. He says that while science is amazing at explaining how the natural world works, it can't answer those big questions about values, meaning, or morality. Those are in the realm of philosophy, ethics, maybe even spirituality.
It's like science tells us how the universe works, but it can't tell us what it all means, or how we should live our lives in light of that knowledge.
Precisely. And that's why Harari suggests that science needs a guiding hand, so to speak. It needs some kind of ethical framework, whether that comes from humanism, from religion, or some other system of values.
Because knowledge without wisdom can be a dangerous thing.
Exactly. And then he takes it even further and suggests that we can even think about science itself as a kind of religion.
Whoa, science as a religion, how so?
Well, think about it. Science has its own set of beliefs, right? Its
Yeah.
own rituals, its own authorities. You've got the scientific method, the peer review process, these esteemed institutions like universities and research labs. And we often put a lot of faith in what these scientific experts tell us.
It's an interesting way to look at it. It's like we've replaced one set of dogmas with another. We've gone from blindly trusting priests to blindly trusting scientists.
And it's not that science is bad, it's just that, like with anything else, blind faith can be dangerous. Harari's point is that we need to be critical thinkers, even when it comes to science. Question what we're told. Be open to different viewpoints.
Makes sense. And speaking of questioning assumptions, Harari takes aim at one of the core ideas of liberalism, the belief in free will. And this is a debate that's been going on for ages, right? So what's Harari's stance on all of this?
Well, he argues that this idea of free will, which forms the bedrock of so much of our modern political and economic thought, is becoming harder and harder to reconcile with what we're learning about neuroscience and genetics.
So as we learn more about how our brains work, it becomes less clear whether we're truly calling the shots, right?
Right. He talks about how our decisions are actually shaped by this crazy complex web of factors, things we're often not even aware of, like our genes, our upbringing, our environment, all these unconscious biases. It's a lot.
It's like we're running on autopilot way more than we realize.
That's exactly it. And Harari says this new understanding of the brain really challenges this liberal idea of individual autonomy and rational choice.
Right, because if we're not really the ones in control, then what does that even mean for ideas like responsibility, accountability, even justice?
Yeah, it's a thorny issue, for sure. And Harari doesn't pretend to have all the answers. But he wants us to at least confront these truths about ourselves and think about what they might mean for how we structure our societies, our systems.
This is heavy stuff. But it's these kinds of big, challenging questions that make Homo Deus such a fascinating read. And of course, Harari doesn't stop there. He goes on to explore a topic that's both exciting and a little bit terrifying, the rise of artificial intelligence. And I know we touched on AI a bit earlier, but Harari really goes deep on this one, exploring the potential impact it could have on humanity. And he's not afraid to go there, to the thought-provoking and, yeah, sometimes kind of scary places.
It's a topic that sparks both fear and excitement, for good reason. AI has the potential to completely change everything. Healthcare, transportation, even how we wage war.
It's like we're standing on the edge of a whole new era, right? One where machines could surpass human intelligence and capabilities. It's exciting and a little unnerving all at the same time.
Exactly. And Harari doesn't shy away from those big, uncomfortable questions. He asks us to really think about what it means to be human in a world where machines might be smarter than us. It challenges our very sense of identity, our purpose.
These are questions that science fiction has grappled with for years, but now they're becoming increasingly real. AI is getting more sophisticated every day, and it's not just a fantasy anymore.
Yeah.
So what does Harari see as the biggest threats that AI poses to humanity, especially given all this talk about the liberal order and everything we've been discussing?
He points out three main threats that are particularly relevant. First, he suggests that AI could make humans economically and militarily, well, useless.
You mean our skills, our abilities, they could become obsolete.
Exactly. If machines can do things better, faster, more efficiently than humans, what happens to our value? In the job market, in the military, even in society as a whole, it's a big question.
Yeah, it's a sobering thought. And we're already seeing signs of this happening, right? Automation replacing jobs, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. And Harari believes that this trend is only going to intensify. The second big concern he has is that even if AI still finds humans valuable as a whole, it might not place much value on individual humans.
So, like, our worth would be measured by what we contribute to the collective, not by our unique qualities, our
Yeah.
experiences.
Exactly. It's like a vision of the future where individual identity and autonomy are basically absorbed into the needs of the state or the corporation. Like we become cogs in a giant machine rather than unique beings with intrinsic value.
That's a pretty dystopian vision. It's the kind of stuff we see in sci-fi movies, those cautionary tales about technology gone wrong. But it's becoming more and more plausible, isn't it? Especially as AI and big data become so intertwined with our lives. Okay, I think I'm ready for the third threat. Hit me with it.
All right, so Harari's third concern is probably the most unsettling one. He says AI might still find value in some individuals, but these would be like a new elite, those who've been upgraded. They'd be superhumans, but the rest of us, we might not be so lucky.
So instead AI benefiting all of humanity, it could actually worsen inequality, creating this world where a select few get all the benefits and the rest of us are left in the dust.
It's a real possibility that we have to consider. It's a future where the gap between the haves and have-nots becomes an uncrossable chasm. Your access to technology determines your place in society, your worth, not a future I'm particularly thrilled about.
It's a lot to process, and definitely not the most optimistic picture of what's to come. But I appreciate that Harari doesn't sugarcoat things. He's making us confront these uncomfortable possibilities head on.
He is, and it's necessary, isn't it? It's easy to get swept up in all the excitement about new gadgets and advancements, but we need to be having these critical conversations about the potential downsides, the unintended consequences. That's how we make sure technology serves us, not the other way around.
We can't just blindly embrace every shiny new tech without thinking about the long-term implications.
Exactly. This isn't just about, upgrading our smartphones. This is about a fundamental reshaping of society, of what it means to be human. And these conversations, they're not optional. We have to have them now, before it's too late, before these technologies become so ingrained in our lives that we can't control them anymore.
Because once that genie's out of the bottle, it's tough to put it back in.
Tell me about it.
So Harari lays out these potential threats,
Yeah.
but does he offer any solutions? Any hope? Are we destined to become slaves to the machines?
He doesn't offer any easy answers, and that's okay. The future isn't predetermined. We're creating it right now with every choice we make. But he does give us some thought-provoking ideas, some potential paths forward that are worth exploring.
Well, let's dive into those ideas when we come back from a quick break. This is a conversation we definitely need to continue. All right, so we've covered a ton of ground already, from ancient history to this potential rise of super intelligent AI. It's clear Harari isn't afraid to tackle those big, even kind of scary questions about where humanity is headed. But does he actually offer any solutions, any glimmers of hope in this crazy, rapidly changing world?
Harari's not really in the business of handing out easy answers. He's more about getting us to think critically about the choices we're making, the consequences of those choices. But he does offer some really interesting ideas, potential paths forward, definitely worth thinking about.
Okay, well, don't leave us hanging. Give us some examples. What can we do to navigate this whole complex situation and, create a future where humans and technology can both thrive?
One of the big themes that runs through Homo Deus is this idea of wisdom and compassion. that we need to cultivate those things alongside all this technological advancements. Like as we gain more power over our own biology, over the planet, over intelligence itself, it becomes even more important to ground ourselves in some kind of ethical framework, one that puts the well-being of everyone first, not just a select few.
Yeah, it's like that saying, with great power comes great responsibility.
You're
We
right.
can't just get lost in what's technologically possible. We have to think about what's ethically right to actually use these powerful tools for good.
Exactly. And to do that, Harari suggests we might need a real shift in perspective, like moving away from these purely individualistic or nationalistic worldviews. It's about recognizing how interconnected we all are as humans, as part of this planet, this cosmos.
It's like we need a system upgrade, as a species,
Yeah.
to move past these outdated ways of thinking that just aren't working anymore.
Exactly. And that might mean being open to new forms of spirituality, new ethical frameworks, things that can help us navigate this world that's becoming more and more shaped by technology every day. And, we might need to find new ways of finding meaning, purpose, connection, especially as AI and automation start to disrupt things like traditional religion and even work.
It's like we're being challenged to redefine what it even means to be human in this 21st century,
Mm.
and beyond. It's a little daunting, sure, but it's also incredibly exciting. We have this opportunity to shape the future, to build something that reflects our values.
That's the spirit. And even though Harari doesn't give us a step-by-step guide, he does remind us that the future isn't set in stone. We're writing it right now with every choice we make, every action we take.
So what can we as individuals actually do?
Yeah.
It's easy to feel powerless, like our choices don't matter that much in the grand scheme of things.
Harari really emphasizes the importance of staying informed, being critical thinkers, and engaging in these conversations. We can't just passively consume technology. We have to be active participants in shaping how it develops, how it impacts the world.
We're not just along for the ride, we're the ones holding the Mac.
Right, that's a great way to put it. And that might mean supporting organizations that are trying to put ethics at the forefront of technology, or advocating for responsible regulations, or even just having these conversations with our friends, our families about these really important issues.
Because these aren't just abstract ideas, right?
Yeah,
They have real consequences for all of us. They're shaping the world we're going to live in.
exactly. Harari's book is a call to action. It's an invitation to wake up, to get involved, and to help steer humanity towards a better future.
It's a powerful message. And we've covered so much in this deep dive. It's amazing. From those early struggles with famine to, who knows, maybe one day engineering happiness. From the birth of agriculture to the dawn of artificial intelligence, Homo Deus takes us on an incredible journey through human history and then launches us into this unknown territory of the future. So, expert speaker, what are your final thoughts on this incredible, mind-bending book?
For me, what really sticks with me is this. We are at a turning point. We have more power than ever before as a species, but that means we have a huge responsibility to use that power wisely, with compassion. The decisions we're making today, they're not just shaping our lives, they're shaping the future of humanity and the future
Yeah.
of our planet. No pressure, right?
It's a lot to think about. But those are the conversations we have to be having if we want to create a future where humanity can not just survive, but thrive. So to all our listeners out there, if you're ready to have your mind blown wide open, Homo Deus is a must-read. It'll challenge you, it'll make you think, but ultimately it leaves you with this sense of hope, this sense that we have the power to create a future worthy of our potential. And that's a wrap on this deep dive. Until next time, keep those brain cells buzzing and never stop asking those big, important questions.